Alright everyone, welcome back for a Dominions 5 nation analysis at the request of one of my patrons, and today we're going to be continuing our look at the monkey nations by pivoting from late age Patala all the way back to the early age, for one of the strongest incarnations of the monkey line, but certainly one of the darkest. So, hope you'll join me today for a look at early age Lanka. Lanka is a nation with a long and storied history in the Dominions community. It was famously, I believe, thought of as one of the really powerful nations in Dominions 4. A number of changes to Dominions 5 took the wind out of its sails a little bit, but I still look at this nation with tremendous respect and rate it among the early age nations. We're going to do what we always do. We're going to cover the lore first, have a look at what the story underpinning Lanka is. We're going to look at units, we're going to look at mages, and we're going to use some of the analysis we did in the late age Patala video to pick up some common themes. We're going to go over the summons again, many of which I covered in the Patala video, but so we can talk more about the use cases and how you deploy them as opposed to getting stuck on what each individual summon is. Then I'm going to talk about broad overarching strategies and potential god designs for this nation, because one of the great complexities of Lanka is that it presents you with far more trade-offs than other nations often do. Because it is a nation which has reanimating priest mages that are also blood hunters, you are always going to be having to make the trade-off between reanimating long dead, setting up more blood hunting, researching, or deploying your mages in combat. And that complex system of trade-offs means that I think Lanka has a relatively high skill ceiling. Not necessarily in terms of how to structure its combat magic and its armies, but I think running a Lankan economy to the optimum extent is one of the more difficult challenges one can take on in Dominions 5. Certainly running it well is pretty easy, but I think running it optimally is something that would require a fair amount of practice. So, let's start with the basics. What is the story of Lanka? So we've got to remember, we've gone all the way back to the early age here. In the Dominions equivalent of the Indian subcontinent, and then off the Indian subcontinent where the nation of, at this point, Kailasa, which is the Bandar and whatnot, being ruled by their semi-divine means, the Kailasan Devatas and all that sort of stuff. Off the coast is the island. You can think of it as like Dominion Sri Lanka, which is called Lanka. And on Lanka, instead of the monkeys being ruled by the spirits that come down from Mount Kailasa, they're ruled by Rakshasas, demon ogres. In some ways, this is equivalent to Yomi. You've got a mortal population that is ruled over by a population of demons who have not yet gotten to the point where they have been pushed out of a decreasingly magical world. No. In this era, it is the Bandar are ruled by the Rakshasas, and there are also a half-breed species of Bandar crossed with Rakshasas called the Kalamukha, which take on sort of the sacred role that the white ones play. There are no white ones in the nation of Lanka. Read into that what you will. There is a suggestion in the lore that the monkey people have been made to serve as warriors, hunters, or food, and I certainly don't see any white one hunters. And it does say the Rakshasas have no use for the peaceful white ones, and the Kalamukas take that role instead. So, without reading too much into that, welcome to the dark, dreary horribleness that is Lanka. But hey, if you're here to win an Ascension War, you're good to go. So, you've got the demon ogres and the demon ogre cross with Bandar who rule the entire thing, and you've got a whole range of summons who are larger and more powerful demon ogres and other creatures of chaos and darkness that can be brought into the world. If there is no intervention from the player, the Lunken Rakshasas will pick a fight with Kailasa. They will continue their fight with the mainland goody two-shoes. By the Middle Age, there is no sign of Lanka anymore. All of these demon ogres exist, if they exist at all, exist as summons, which means they have been pushed off the mortal plane or are available in such small numbers that they're not in organized communities or running a nation anymore. You then thus have to assume, considering that you look at the Bandar history and it says their ones willingly left, their divine beings willingly left, that Lanka probably lost. And I like to imagine this has something to do with them being, well, potentially them being disorganized, potentially just the fact that if Dominion's geography is anything like real-world geography, then Sri Lanka is not going to pick a fight with India and win. But who knows? That information isn't available to us, or at least I haven't seen it. All I do know is that Lanka ceases to be by the end of this age. But it is a nation which gives you more than enough to work with if you want to avoid history playing out and instead raise Lanka and its awakening god to the status of Pantocrator and thus subject the entire world to rule by, well, a god that would pick demon ogres as their sponsoring nation. So that said, let's have a quick look at the national summary and then have a look at the units. So prefer heat scale 2. Your magic is air, blood, death, nature. We'll see that when we go through the mages. National priests can reanimate, so this is a reanimator priest nation. The blood hunts for Lanka give more blood slaves in turmoil and less in order. This is important and has a strong synergy with some of the chaos power that you see on a lot of your units, mages, and summons. The Lunken blood economy actually works better in turmoil than it does in order, which makes it the complete opposite of every other blood nation in the game. You still pay the price in terms of unrest spiking, and thus you're requiring a lot of patrolling in order to keep those blood hunts under control, but it means you can run an optimal blood economy and dump, instead of being +3 order, be all the way down in +3 and -3 turmoil, which is a huge number of scales points that work for you rather than against you. You build standard forts and you have a lineup which is mixed between a monkey roster, so a familiar Mercada, Atavi, Bandar lineup, and then a series of demon ogres and Kalamukha as your sacred units and as your commanders. Let's have a look. The Mercada are basically the same as they always were, so you can see my guide on Patala for that. Basically, you've still got what you had before, which was some extremely cheap, pretty damage spongy because they're 14 defense size 1. So excellent lance catching guys, including lance catching guys with 7 damage short bows. And suddenly you're a nation that can actually put flaming arrows on these guys if you get the right magic together. So you've got those guys available to you. The 7 damage bow wasn't particularly dangerous in other ages, but in this sort of era, where you've got Wind Guide available to you and most things don't actually have a whole bunch of armor because it's the early age, a little bit more useful. Atavi too. Atavi is still shit. Like, they're still basically a 0-prot militia, but they can have quite cheap short bows, and you lose undisciplined and you gain, and you're stealthy in exchange for having a 7 damage short bow. And hey, you're now in an era where these troops are not as shit as they were in the late age, where they were horribly, horrifically, absolutely outmatched by just about everything they came up against, independent or otherwise. And that's a theme that I'm going to speak through, and it applies to both Lanka and to Kailasa. Monkey troops for Patala are complete garbage because they're competing in the late age, where everyone has armor and industry and organization and thus fantastic troops. But in the early era, the relatively subpar monkey units are the most competitive they will ever be. The Bandar units that you have available to you, you still have the light Bandar archer, who I talked about when I did Patala. This is a 14 damage longbow in the early era, so that hits hard, plus got a 21 damage mace for close combat. Problem is, 16 gold for a bow is pretty bloody expensive. You do get 18 hit points, so it's cheap per hit point, but yeah. The light Bandar warrior, or rather, I should say the Bandar warrior, but this is basically a light Bandar warrior in a lot of ways. It's got the 21 damage mace, and it's got the 2 attack sticks and stones attack at 12 damage, so you get 2 12 bludgeoning damage shots per round with like 35 ammo or something, 30 ammo, so you get 15 shots. And that scales with strength too, so strength of giants and that's a lot of missile damage coming in. It is in fact more missile damage, especially if you get strength buffed, than the longbow units deliver. Plus, you have 10 protection and this 21 damage mace. The Bandar warrior is acceptable. The only problem is no hat. This is always a problem, but 18 hit points means you're probably going to survive one head hit. The problem is you're going to go down a heck of a lot quicker than if you just took chipping damage to the chest. Remember, spears are going to be rolling, 14 damage, 12 to 14 damage piercing against that, which is 8. The Bandar are going to soak multiple hits from spears and things in the early age, but a stab to the head is far more likely to put them down. Still, acceptable. Certainly more acceptable now than they were when we talked about them last time in the late age. And 21 damage in EA is going to kill just about anything you swing it at. Not kill it. It will break through the protection of just about anything you swing it at, except for very specially designed sacreds. Nephil giants, for example, might resist 21 bludgeoning damage. But hey, it's early age, that's the price you pay. Now we've got a series of non-monkey units. Smaller roster, you'll notice that white ones are missing and some of the varieties of units are missing, and the higher caste Atavi, the Vanara, are entirely missing. But, to be honest, they're not missed. Then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, count them, 4 sacreds, of which 3 are capital only, but you need to note that one of them isn't. It's actually important. Let's talk about them. The Asara is your cheap as shit version of your sacred. So here you pay 35 gold, 4 resources for a demon ogre that is basically butt naked. He's wearing something to protect his dignity. What is a demon ogre? What is a Rakshasa? So, common traits. Demon. This is a shit tag. It basically means you're going to get dark vision 100. Like, good on you, bro. But in exchange, you're vulnerable to cleansing waters and demon cleansing and all of the anti-demon spells and whatnot that exist in the game. You are also technically vulnerable to banishment. Not to anti-undead spells, but certainly vulnerable to banishment. MR12 gives you decent resistance, but still, demon is a bad tag. Forest survival, gluttony, and then chaos power 1 and sacred. So, chaos power means that for every turmoil scale, you gain 1 attack and 1, I believe it's 1 attack and 1 defense. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is 1 attack and 1 defense. We can check that in a moment. Either way, the attack and defense is certainly what I noticed the biggest difference with. And it goes both ways. You gain strength in turmoil and you lose it in order. So, you might go up to 15 attack skill in turmoil 3, but you're worse than an average human in order 3. We're going to talk about the strategic ramifications of this chaos power tag later on. Because I think on net, it is a great advantage for Lanka and the way I would want to play Lanka. Anyway, what is this unit? This is your, I don't have resources, maybe it's turn 1 and you don't quite have the resources for maximum recruitment, so you make an Asara. The problem with the Asara is that while it's really, really beefy, like 33 hit points is really beefy, good value for the gold, 3 protection just won't cut it. It does hit really hard and has a hard-hitting javelin, but something that isn't naked is probably going to be better. The Anusara loses the javelin and gains basically monumental combat speed. Like, apparently having the head and legs of like a donkey or whatever it is, yeah, there we are. Head and legs of a donkey makes it ridiculously fast. So this is a shitty light cavalry, sacred like cavalryman, basically. It's sacred, it's blessable, it's going to have the same benefit from chaos power, and have decent stats, and it's still pretty damn cheap, especially in terms of resources. But having a completely naked unit is not ideal. You will just take a lot more damage that you don't need to take. Either way, though, you've got these options available to you if you just don't have the resources and you don't want to waste sacred recruitment. I'd still say they're worth 35 gold if you have a decent bless. Then you have 2 species of sacred. One is capital only, one is not. The Palankasha is the big daddy of the demon ogre sacred troops. We're up to 55 gold now, which is a bit of a hike. Like, that's a bit of a hike. You get chest protection, which makes them much, much more survivable. You have a 27 damage falchion, and you still have chaos power. You don't have head protection, is my objection, but this unit hits really, really hard and has good base statistics, so with a little bit of bless, this can go a long way. People used to throw, I believe, like regeneration and stuff on these guys, because with 30 hit points, you're in pretty good shape so far as regen goes. So there is that, but, you know, the head protection thing is a problem. Either way, look, they're good recruits. They're not Vanhirs in terms of value for money, but they're still pretty good. And the key here is that when operating defensively, when operating within your dominion, or when attacking someone else who has taken turmoil, so maybe you're rolling in on Yomi or something, those stats are deceptive. They're going to go into the stratosphere, or at least they're going to go up high enough that suddenly you're competitive with the high stat sacreds that might be available. A Palankasha, which is getting a 3 buff from Chaos Power, and so is up to attack skill 16, and has 2 attack in its Bless, and is so at attack 18, and then kills something and has Blood Surge, you get the point. Suddenly you're looking at a unit that hits hard and hits reliably, and can even hit the really sky-high defense values that you encounter in the early age. And that's worth something. In an era where you're going to have really high defense sacreds or high protection and still high statistic sacreds, I'm thinking about things like the White Centaurs and Vanhirs and whatnot, having a unit that is available at the start of the game that hits accurately and very, very hard is worth something. The compatriot to the Palankasha, by the way, is the Kalamukha Warrior. The Kalamukha Warrior, I've seen it labeled as capital only in a lot of guides. It's not, so maybe that was changed at some point, but it's definitely Wreck Anywhere. So any fort that you have with a temple can put out Kalamukha Warriors. The problem with the Kalamukha, well, there's a couple. First of all, what you get is okay for the value. It's probably a bit much. You get a Dark Vision 50 Sacred unit with 24 hit points. So you're paying a bit of a premium compared to the per hit point relative to the Palankasha. You get Palankasha attack and defense. You're doing 26 damage with your Falchion. You're at 14 protection, 15 at the head, 10 at the body. So suddenly you have head protection, which is good. Forest survival, but your problems are MR10 and animal. Because you are not a demon ogre, instead of having the horrible demon tag, you instead have the animal tag and low magic resistance, which makes you vulnerable to all the charm animal stuff out there. Or if you're playing against someone who's just going to use MR check or die spells, MR10's not very good. You are sacred though, so depending on the option you go, you might be able to layer up to an extra 3 built-in magic resistance on these guys, depends how you go. But a recruit anywhere sacred, even if it's not great, is something that can be nation-defining depending on how you play it. Most people, however, would say it is not the troops, it's not even the sacreds that make Lanka, it's the mages, it's the summon, the economy. We'll come back to that concept. Let's talk about commanders. You got a Mercada scout. Awesome. Mercada are better scouts than scouts. They're cheaper. And they're pretty stealthy. Cool. Atavi Chieftain pass, you'll make them if you have no other choice and you need some commanders. Bandar Commander is a good commander for 75 gold. Bandaraja, you pay 115 gold, and suddenly you have 120 leadership, which is actually good morale bonus if you happen to need morale. One thing I will say about all these sacred troops is that they actually have pretty damn good morale. 13, 14s across the place. Bandar themselves have 12. So it's unlikely that you're going to need to lead your troops with the Bandaraja. Plus, if you're leading Palankashas rather than Kalamukas, you need some, they're demons, so you need special leadership, which the Bandaraja doesn't have. So he can only really lead Kalamukha. That said, Kalamukha, led by a Bandaraja who has maybe 2 morale boosting items, you're at morale 18, not counting veterancy, you start to get a little resistant to morale check stuff like Wailing Winds, or at least you'll hold on a little bit. Not great, but hey, remember that he exists. He has a 29 damage battle axe at attack skill 12, but you're not going to use a 115 gold commander in that way. Let's talk mages. This is the real deal. This is the stuff right here. There's a lot to like about the Lunken mage lineup, and almost all of these. Well, anyway, let's just dive in before we talk about the general traits. The Rakshasi. The Rakshasi is the sort of mage that Perun really likes. It knows what it's there to do, and it doesn't do anything other than what it's there to do. And thus gives you really good value at its core activity. So, a Raktapada is a sacred 80 gold priest mage. That's great, which means a Raktapada can lead small parties of sacreds in expansion. The negative morale doesn't matter because your sacreds have really high morale, so it can bless and run small parties of sacreds. It's an efficient blood hunter because it's 80 gold and half upkeep, so you're paying 32 gold per year, which is less than 3 gold per turn for a blood hunter. It's also a super efficient, well, not super efficient, but a pretty bloody efficient researcher. Put this thing in magic scales, you can get up to 10 research for 32 gold a year. Great. It's a reanimator priest. Now, it's nowhere near as efficient as a Solarian cultist at being a reanimator priest, but it's your most efficient reanimator priest if you choose to go that way. So, the Raktapada knows what they're there to do. They're either there to be holding a sanguine dowsing rod and going off and hunting blood slaves in Turmoil 3. They're there to lead your sacred parties. They're there to do your research. As many Raktapada as you had, if you were offered 50 Raktapada at game start, you would take it because the Raktapada is at the core of everything you do. Your research, your blood economy, your reanimation, your early expansion, it's all there. The Yogini, you're paying a little bit more. You're not paying more commander points. You're paying about twice as much gold though. And you're doing this for paths. You're picking up Death 1, Nature 2, you're going up to 13 research points, and you are not sacred. So, you don't want these guys sitting around researching, but we've now got Death and N2. N2 is a nice start. The Kalamukha is like the, what was his name again? I forgot for a moment. The Raktapada. These are Raktapada Mark II. This is the enhanced Raktapada. This is the premium version. You've still only got Blood 1, but you get to roll the dice and possibly get Blood 2, or Death 1 or Nature 1, but B2 is an option. You've gone up to Holy 2, you're still a Reanimator Priest. You now have 9 base research rather than 7, but you're paying more than twice as much gold. This is the premium version, and I'm not a big fan of the premium version, to be honest. The magic is unfocused, Holy 2 is unnecessary, the leadership isn't particularly good. I'm a bit of a pass on the Kalamukha. The Rakshasi and Raksharaja, the capital onlys, however, are a bit of a different story. So, summary, the non-capital only mages, you're basically putting out Raktapada everywhere to run your blood economy. You don't really have a great battle mage. The Yogini can do it, but you're based on nature magic at that point. Mind you, nature magic with a Sabbath and death magic with a Sabbath, you can get there. You're missing a good... you could do better so far as recruit anywhere battle mage options go, but the fact that you have the Raktapada, I'll trade away a recruit anywhere battle mage for that because it means I'm going to have a functional... all my economy stuff is going to be sorted, and they can always be Sabbath slaves, right? They have 21 hit points, so they're pretty beefy so far as slaves go. The Rakshasi now is starting to get into some serious business. Let's see if I've got one recruited, because then I can show it off. Do I not? Let's just quickly, let's recruit a Rakshasi in the capital. Okay, so this is a Rakshasi in their shape-changed form. So, and this is a Rakshasi in the non-shape-changed form. So, there you go. Let's talk about the unit. Air 1, Death 1. Instantly, I'm in. Because now you've got air, death, cross path, and then you have either astral or blood, in this case blood, which means you can go into communion, which means you can play all the overpowered death air stuff. You can't do it as a turn 1 cast, but as long as you can wire that into a communion, you can do Wind of Death, but more importantly, you can do Wailing Winds, you can do Storms, you can do big battlefield death magic. You're here and you're playing for keeps. You've got a lot of random rolls. It's the 4 paths you have, again, and you get 2 extra levels plus a small chance at 10%. So the Rakshasi are also going to be your chances for 3 in any of these paths. Up to 3 blood, up to 3 air, up to 3 death. 3 death actually means 4 death, and we're getting closer to the magic numbers. Your combination for this is 4x4, which is 1 in 16 to get the combination that you like. It's a little bit better than that because of the 10% chance. So you don't want to make 16 Rakshasi, but you can probably get to 2 paths that way. The Raksha Raja jumps you straight to 2 in air, doesn't have as many random rolls, but has a more focused random roll. So the Raksha Raja is how you get 3A recruitable, and this is a pretty beefy capital only mage. In a game where there's lots of stuff out there that can be beefy capital only thug, this is a heavy thug. This is a cloud trapezable thug, which has 36 base hit points. It's sacred, so it'll take your bless. The stats are good. The built-in protection, except for the head, is good. So if you give it a hat, it's in much better shape. It can get lucky in terms of paths and pick up a few extra neat tricks. Grabbing its like A3, D2, those are all good. The B3 is probably more useful for summoning than it is for combat, but with a little bit of gear, these are some pretty serious heavy thugs. The problem is they suffer from Dione syndrome. Because they're a demon, as soon as someone breaks out the Holy Scourges or the Demon Banes or whatever, the Raksharajas are going back from whence they came. The Raksharaja then become more of a battlefield unit. They're going to be army support thugging, or they're going to be more likely doing some pretty heavy casting. They're going to be communioned, or they're going to be using storm power or whatever, and they're going to be making a serious contribution there. Your Rakshasi and your Raksharaja, and I believe most of your summons, the big demon ogres have this susceptible to fire 5, but realistically we're going to solve that most of the time. The final thing I'll note, so Rakshasi are sacred, not sacred, stealthy. So they can sneak around and do some dodgy shit, but they're not really optimized for that sort of stealthy thug role. They need a lot in order to make that doable, or some good rolls on their randoms. So that's your lineup of recruitable units. The thing about Lanka, though, is all of the summons that I talked about for Patala as being something where you need to think about whether as Patala you're going to suffer and build your nation in a way that allows you to access them. Well, with Lanka, you are drowning in blood income, or at least you should be drowning in blood income, which means that those summons are instantly so much more applicable to you. Let's go have a quick refresher look at them before we talk tactics, basically. So here we are doing our little bit of a refresher, and the theme is there are a lot of options here. Some are better than others. You've got the option to bring in a lot of sacreds early if you decide to get a blood economy going early at low research levels, or as Lanka, you can save your blood slave income up and start to really break into insanity at blood levels 6, 7, and 8. If you choose to go early and just want mass, you've got 2 very early options and 1 moderately early option. Let's class them like this. Here are your really early options: Pragasas and Asrapas. Pragasa is a level 2, Blood 2 spell that you can easily cast. Blood 1, Nature 1, you've got Recruit Anywheres that can do that. They're just over 3 Blood Slaves per, so you get 15 at once, so it's very Mage Turn equivalent, efficient. What you've got here is a big dumb demon. They've got 35 hit points each, which means you're getting about 10 hit points per blood slave. And considering blood slaves are bloody cheap, it's actually not bad. 13 magic resistance, 14 morale, 13 attack, 10 defense. Everything is actually okay here, except for the fact that we've got 4 protection. Also, they're horribly gluttonous, like they will starve everything else around them because they're gluttons. They're massive gluttons. The sort of more stylish option is to bring in Asrapas. Asrapas only have 1 protection. They survive off the back of having a life drain stabby attack, rather than having a huge slew of hit points. So, they're both options. An Asrapa is also a berserker. Now, in Chaos Power, an Asrapa can get its defense skill pretty high, and they can become not so squishy. But by base, they're pretty bloody squishy. The Pragasas are big sacks of demon HP, but they're pretty resistant, and I wouldn't rule them out entirely. Just remember they exist, because you're going to get Blood 2 very easily. And if you've got a little bit of a blood economy and you're being rushed and your bless is good enough for units, that's a big caveat, then maybe if you've got 100 blood slaves, dropping an extra 30 sacreds into a stack, like maybe, but at the end of the day, low protection and the stats probably not good enough to make it a real deal. Rakshasa Warriors and Sandhyabalas, now we're getting into sort of the heavier stuff. This is Blood 4, Blood 5. We're now paying 5 blood slaves per unit, so a bit of a premium. But while our attack skill and defense skill are still basically what they were as the Prakasas, we're not as gluttonous, and more importantly, we now have 15 protection and this even better two-handed cudgel. That is a fantastic weapon. Now, I'd have to summon them to see exactly how much damage they do, but it's going to be 8, it's going to be 28 plus an extra loading on strength, so you're in the 30s. For these guys, easily, before you start adding in whatever your bless is. They are Chaos Power as well, so this is a big, heavy-hitting Rakshasa unit with a bit of survivability. It's up there. It's equivalent, I think, to the Kalamukha Warrior, possibly even a bit better than the Kalamukha, balanced by the fact it's got resist fire -5, so fire vulnerability 5, and no helmet. 5 blood slaves is not the same as 5 gems. So being able to get sacred units in for 5 slaves per can be a pretty good deal if you want to drown someone in sacreds. Depends how heavy you want your blood economy to go. The Sandhyabalas take another step up. So now we're at 10 blood slaves per unit. So we've doubled our cost. What am I gaining for double the cost? Well, I've gone over to this Moonblade and Shield thing, which means suddenly I have better attack and defense, but there's a little more to it. This is more of a nuanced weapon. The Moonblade is double damage v magic beings and its built-in magic weapon. So this is summonable magic weapons that do extra damage to magic beings. If you want to murder the shit out of ethereal magic beings, Moonblades on your troops is a decent way to do it. Add to that the fact that it is both dark and chaos power, means that suddenly, in certain situations, the stats can go to the freaking moon. If you put it in darkness, so the enemy takes a -3, -3, or a -6, -6, depending on the type of darkness, you gain stats across the board from dark power. It's in turmoil, you're gaining stats across the board from chaos power. This just leans into the theme of the Lunken units that is in the certain in battlefields of choice, in chaos and darkness. Lunken units become very dangerous very quickly. Beyond that, it's a sacred, so it'll take your bless. The fire vulnerability goes into space. It's now 10 fire vulnerability, which is horrible, and really demands a bless to offset if they're going to be used, and they're stealthy. The problem with the Sandhyabala is that by the time you're getting to the point where you can recruit them, you're also able to turn blood slaves into commanders, which is usually a better use of your time. Commanders who can raid, who can operate independently, or who can help drive your economy, are more helpful usually than units. That said, I do think there are scenarios in which I would spend 10 blood slaves on Sandhyabalas. I think there is a scenario in which I would do that, but it would be for very specific enemies. It would be for fighting types of Jinn, for example, if I didn't have a better option. the double damage to magic weapon plus high statistics is going to murder the shit out of someone who's using Jin. If I haven't taken a bless on my units that allows me to counter that, a small number of Sanjabalas would make mincemeat of them. So there they are, Rakshasa Warriors and Sanjabalas. They can both celebrate because they both have a reason to exist. Then we've got some interesting commanders. And they're all really pled in the alternative here because other than research access, they're all using the same basic part of your economy. Where does your blood slave income go? And all of them need to compete again, also against... Let's just put them... Let's just put him here just in case, because you're a blood nation. If you can do it, then they're competing with vampire lords as well. So there we are. Dakini are the bread and butter of Lanka, or at least historically have been the bread and butter of Lanka. They're much more expensive now, I believe, than they were in Dominions 4. They used to be 50 blood slaves, which is way too cheap. Now they're about the same price as demon lords, but they come one research level earlier. What do you get for your... What do you get? It's sacred. It's chaos power. It's basically resistant to shock. It has built-in fear. And then flying, air 3, death 1, blood 3, holy 2. With a built-in life drain weapon. So what this thing needs to be an amazing thug is it needs a little bit more armor. It needs a mechanism to never get hit by someone who wants to come clock it over the head with a holy scourge. And that's probably enough. It can self-buff pretty well with the air. It can drop on targets. Blood 3 means that it can easily be a Blood 4, which means it accesses a whole bunch of your other stuff. For one thing, Dakini can make other Dakini. They got super high map move, even when they're not cloud trapezing. It's just tremendous utility to this unit. I just put the caveat on them that you shouldn't forget the generic alternative, which is once you get to Blood 7, Vampire Lords are also available, and Vampire Lords, while lacking many of these things, so Vampire Lords Cloud Trapeze or any of that sort of stuff, the Vampire Lord is sacred, can make more Vampire Lords, attracts thralls, and more importantly, is immortal. So I think the two are complementary rather than the Dakini completely replacing the Vampire Lord. This is also a good way to get lots of death. You're just going to need an option in your roster to get these paths for the summoning. It's not that hard. The Summon the Shada, I don't think people are going to make Summon a Shada. At least not many of them. 35 gems is cheap. Well, 35 blood slaves is cheap for a commander. What you're really paying for here is like a powerful, conventional, so non-magical assassin. And like, instead of having conventional assassins, I could just have, instead of 3 conventional assassins, I could have another immortal mage. Or I could have a couple of Sanjabalas to chop something down. Like, there are trade-offs at Blood 7. By the time you get to Blood 7, this ceases to be a good idea. Now, Moonblade plus Dust Dagger is pretty brutal, but assassins that work on stabbing things don't work against an awful lot of things in the EA. There's a lot of really good mages out there, and if you try and assassinate them, they're going to summon stuff at you, you're going to die. Blood 8 is where the really big stuff comes, but if your blood economy never goes past B6, maybe B7, but if you never go past B6, that's okay. That's okay for Lanka, although there is reason to keep going. You can pick up things like Blood Rain and whatnot. The Mandeha is amazing. Mandeha is expensive, 133 blood slaves, so you are getting not quite 2 Vampire Lords are being foregone in order to purchase a Mandeha. The Mandeha itself is intimidating. Air 3, Death 3, Blood 2, Sacred 3. So it is a Holy 3 off base. It has fear. It increases unrest. It has a sleep aura around itself. Dark power 3, Chaos power 2. Now we're talking. So in darkness, plus 3s. Chaos 2 per level, which means plus 6, which means you can get plus 9. Built in. Which suddenly means your attack is jumped up like to 24, your defense is 19, suddenly it's a little more respectable. And you will always have that darkness because he auto-casts darkness. I talked about this. It's great. The reason this is great is it just brings darkness to the battlefield so all your demons can be really, really happy. They can enjoy their 100% night vision, and some of them can enjoy their dark power like your Sanjabalas. And in exchange, your enemy can watch their skills go to complete shit if they didn't bring Dark Vision 100 or Spirit Sight. And a lot of things won't have that. So this can really swing the conventional battle. The problem is by the time you're rolling the Mundeha out, the conventional stabbing battle is probably less important. There's a lot of summoned units, and a lot of things are being decided by mages. And who can bring the most mages. But it's still a good capstone unit with, I should say, really good map move because it's got wings and it flies. Those wings don't look big enough to carry that giant freaking demon ogre monkey, but there you go. And then finally, Danavas. Danavas are big, scary, summonable units. They're significant mostly because, well, you can make them into commanders if you want to. The summary is this is a really pretty substantial blood summon lineup. There are sacred troop summons coming out of your eyeballs. There are summonable mages at blood 6, so the Dakini. And if you go further, you can access the generics, and then you capstone at 8. The point is, Lanka can make a lot of use out of blood slaves while being one of the best nations in the game and actually bloody gathering them. So let's jump back into the... Actually, I'm going to pause here for a moment. I'm going to show you heroes, then we're going to jump back into the game. So because Lanka is a turmoil nation, you're going to go turmoil 3. You're probably going to take luck scales so you don't get absolutely boned by bad events. So you're probably going to get your heroes. This is your non-worthy hero up the top, Bapu, the Apostate Raja. You don't really get anything interesting with Bapu. So if you're not playing worthy heroes, then you're taking your luck scales for the gems and things, not for anything like that. It's like, do we really want a pillage bonus? The Implementer Axe, by the way, like, cool story, bro. The point is he leads a lot of undead, and he is sacred, and he has lots of priest levels. What you care about if you're playing worthy heroes is what you get down here, and they're in the not amazing but handy to have category. This thing, which I have to say is definitely not the person I'd be choosing to front all the PR documentation to convince people that Lanka was not in fact evil. You've got Blood 2, Nature 2, Death 2. It kills population, eats people, it's stealthy, it's got some Crush and Swallow attacks. So Swallow means that if the target is smaller than you, you just grab it and eat it, and if your unit is not killed, then that unit is gone. So there you go. Rip. Nice to have, cool, nothing particularly defining. Ravana, the Demon King, handy here because we're picking up Death 3, still on Blood, so we're getting a lot closer to something that can Vampire Summon. We've got 9 attacks from the Fist, magic weapons, and the Laughing Blade, which is basically a specialized Moon Blade. Triple damage v undead demon extra effect, armor piercing, slashing magic. Air 2, as I said, Air 2, Death 3, Blood 2, Sacred 3, Chaos Power, Fear. So making vampires, I guess, as well as just being awesome. Regeneration 25% on 30 hit points ain't bad. Might even be worth enlarging this thing and using it to thug once you've broken into vampires. And then finally, I'm not particularly excited here, but I will say this. These guys, they're multi-heroes. So they're Rakshasas, but they're like bunny Rakshasas, I think. And the weirdest freaking thing about them is that somehow this means that they have seduction. I don't know. Morale V14 Seduction. Now, Morale V14 Seduction, and you're a Nature and an Air Mage, and you're going to come with random extra paths, so you might have N2, you might have A2, you might have E1. A lot of good paths in there. Go seduce some things. Go seduce some things with your bunny face, bunny-faced demon ogre, because apparently some people go in for that. 25 hit points in a size 2 chassis, by the way. Pretty cool. Anyway, those are your heroes. I just wanted to mention them so we didn't have to come back to them. They're not game-changing, but you're probably going to get them. Well, if you're not playing Worthy Heroes, you're just going to get Bapu. If you are playing Worthy Heroes, you'll probably get them because you're probably going to have a luck build. Let's jump into the game and talk about how all these different pieces of Lanka fit together and your options before we talk about god design. So what's your strengths and weaknesses, and what is your game plan with Lanka? Let's start with the really obvious statement. You have an end game as Lanka built in. You are an amazing blood nation with unique blood summons. So if the game goes long enough, what you're going to do is you're going to build an oppressive blood economy, and you're going to drown everyone else in blood summons. And then at the point where they're all coalitioning you anyway, you're probably going to throw up Astral Corruption to bone everyone else completely, except for the other Blood Nations. So, and then if Micklin is still in the game, you can have a Blood Nation off for the victory. So if you already have a late game, and your late game is Blood and Summons and all those sort of options, you also can get into Death, so you can have Blood and Death as late game options. Plus you have Sabbath of All Magic, which is another late game, mid and late game option. The question then becomes, what do you have for the mid and the early game, and how does all this fit together? Because the game is not won just in the end game. You can't press a button to get to skip there. You need an option to survive, thrive, and expand before you get there. First against independence, then against others, and then fending off others until your late game strength can come into play. So there's a couple of factors that impact how Lanka fights that. I want to talk about them in order. I want to talk about what chaos power and the nature of your sacreds means for you. I want to talk about what the reanimation economy and blood economy trade-off basically is, and how you allocate across that, and then we'll lead into god design. I really like chaos power. I like chaos power because if you're doing the right thing and spreading your dominion, you will be turmoiling pretty quickly your provinces. Turmoil 3, relatively quickly. What it means is Lanka can pick and choose which sacred it uses between offensive and defensive operations. In defensive operations, things like Palankashas and your summonable Chaos Power Thugs all do far better than their base costing would suggest. The Palankasha in Chaos, have I got some Palankashas in my capital? I do. Here we are. This is a Palankasha in Turmoil 3. 30 hit points, 16 attack, 15 defense, without any bless effect going into play. This is a much more respectable stat line. In fact, this is a very good stat line. This is a stat line that, coupled with it doing 30 damage, makes them pretty freaking brutal, in fact. The Kalamukha, by contrast, is still at 13-12. So, on defense, your Chaos Power Sacreds come into their own and are very cost efficient. Considering that a Blood Nation usually just wants to ward people off, like keep them out, Chaos Power is probably a net gain for you. If you want to move into non-Chaos Power territory, you have a Recruit Anywhere Sacred available to you, the Kalamukha Warrior. Or you can just rely on mages and thugs who aren't really relying on their attack and defense stats so much as their magic and items and whatnot in order to achieve the mission that they're going to do. So, Lanka does relatively well at hardening itself up against early rushes. It has a couple of ways it can fend these off. I would split them into 3 basic approaches that help Lanka survive the early game. The first option is the Awake Expander Lanka. This, I believe, has been popular in the past, and the argument here is Lanka monkey nations don't expand particularly well without a heavy bless, and a big monster helps you expand and stake out territory early on, plus a big scary monster is good deterrence against someone coming to mess with you. I think all that's true, but the penalty you pay with that, with the Awake Early Expander, is that you get less bless and less scales for your buck. And in the end, when what you're trying to do is either put out lots of sacred summons, units or mages, having a quality bless behind them probably matters. Plus, you're probably not getting rushed inside turn 12, which leads to option 2. Option 2 is the Dormant Titan build, wherein you lock away one of Lanka's Titan options, and the Indian Titans are great because of the extra hands, which means you can mount multiple weapons and shields on the same chassis and really make them bloody obnoxious. You take one of those, you stick fire shock resistance on it, and I'll show you what these gods look like later. You throw fire and shock resistant on it because you need to offset the fire weakness if you're going to be using the fire weak units somehow. It's incarnate, so you only get it at turn 12, but no one's dropping fire. The indies aren't dropping fire and shock magic on you, so you can wait till turn 12 for that. You grab that, Blood Surge, and some stat blesses. Your expansion is a little bit rough, but it can be done pretty well. Using your sacreds and troops that are available to you, like relatively fine. And then at turn 12, you get the Titan comes out, you put a bit of gear on it, and it's in a position to really deter a lot of the early things that can come your way. A properly built Titan can deal with a White Centaur rush. A very well built and specialized Titan can deal with a Vanir rush. It needs to be something that can tank an obnoxious amount of damage or deal a lot back in return, but you can make Titans that are pretty invulnerable to that kind of stuff. The Vanhirs are difficult because they berserk, and so they tend to break through things like all layered defenses and whatnot, but the Titan is a strong deterrent power, and it will be useful as time goes on, certainly more useful than most awake monsters will be. The third option, which I think has fallen out of favor and didn't get much mention in the guides I was talking about, but you could really lean into the sacreds in an imprisoned bless kind of sense. You could take an imprisoned, which is good for your accessing your later game spells. So at turn 36, you can open up some really late game summons and open the door to that sort of thing. And you're not going to get things like, Blood 7 or Conjuration 8 or whatever summons out much before turn 36 anyway. And in return, you can layer a whole bunch of stat and resistance blesses that are designed to really help make your units the best that they can be. You can make Palankashas so good on defense that they'll make even the rushiest nations think twice, that they will at least be able to put up a fight. Plus, they can propel you to victory in an early war against someone who's been a little more greedy. In that sort of model, what you're probably going to be doing, if you've got a big imprisoned bless, is you're going to have the economy to back up sacred spamming. You're going to want to get Kalamukas out of your non-capital forts, even though they're 50 gold. You're going to want to get recruitable thugs out and use them until the counters come out. You're going to want to summon sacred units as well and hope that people don't roll out too many of the demon counters. And when they do, you can always fall back on the Kalamukha Warrior until MR negates stuff starts rolling out. So those are the three basic how to survive the early game options. I don't think Lanka can get away with doing none of them. If you, for example, take a very dedicated late game Thug Bless on an imprisoned unit, anyone who spots that who's worth their salt is going to get someone who is more rush capable, and they're going to come at you because your late game potential is too much to be ignored. Small extra early game trick I would add is if you prophetize a reanimated priest early on, so if you say prophetize a Rakshasi, they can reanimate as level 3, which means you can get either 24 souls if there are corpses, or you can get 7 long dead per turn. And that's probably a good little segue to talk about what reanimation, blood hunting, and this trade-off economy that Lanka has. Lanka's basic economic trade-off is that it's really basic priest, the Rakshasi, the one that does everything, can any given turn be giving you, say, 9 research points, or instead of 9 research points, it can give you 3 long dead, or instead of all of that, it can be blood hunting. And managing this trade-off is really quite difficult if you want to do it optimally. I'm going to say my piece right now. I don't think long dead spamming is the place to go for Lanka. You pay, at its most efficient, you're paying about 1 gold per long dead that you reanimate. And the long dead vary wildly. You get long dead Mercada, who do 3 damage and whose job is to catch a lance. I mean, it is cheaper than a regular Mercada, but like it could be research instead. That Mercada could instead be 3 research points. You can also get pretty decent ones. Like here's a Long Dead Bandar. Long Dead Bandar doesn't have much defense or protection, but it's got 11 hit points, it's pierce resistant, and it does 21 damage. So some Long Dead might have a place. A lot of them, however, things like the Vanara, just have fist attacks. They're not great. So it's a bit of a grab bag. I wouldn't spam the undead. A lot of the time, they're just going to get banished, but there's a place for them in small quantities. Certainly this trick of getting a level 3 early, it's adding 7 extra undead a turn pretty much for free. If you're in a province where there's a bunch of corpses, you can spam out some soulless pretty well. You're also a nation that can get the crossplars to really do corpse man construction, so you're not at a loss for undead chaff. The blood hunt option and the research options. The research is usually the better investment to an extent. There's no cost associated with it. Blood hunting should scale though, and you probably want to get started based on how many blood huntable provinces you have and what research targets you need to hit for your first wars versus how much you need to hit the panic button on the sacred summons. If you're going to have to pick out grab a whole bunch of Thrapas or whatever, or Prakasas early on because you just need a bunch of sacreds now, then you're going to need to deploy the blood hunters in order to do it. I would just be aware of what is your patrol strength capacity and so how many blood hunters can you support? Because you're hunting in turmoil, you're going to have to really patrol pretty freaking hard to keep that unrest down. But you will get really good blood slave yields as Lanka. You will get good slave yields. Like we'll just do a little test at 108, right? We'll deploy 2 level 1 blood hunters. Let's deploy them to Kebon. 6,000 population. 6,000 population. Nothing special about these guys. We're going to blood hunt. It's turmoil 3, right? 8 slaves. I don't think that was a very good hit, but you can see skyrocketed. 52 unrest. And it looks like the successful hunt was the first guy and the second one wasn't successful. So break up your blood hunters and patrol. You can see what I mean here. You can scale the blood economy very early with Lanka if you want to, but you need to modulate that with the demands of research. I wouldn't get distracted with too much undead summoning. The later you go in the game, the more valuable each blood slave gets because you can do more and more with it. At the point where you can turn them into Dakini, they're worth more than when you could only turn them into Prakasas. So, what do you take away from all of that with the game plan? First of all, build a Lanka that matches your desire. If you want to go Awake Expander Lanka, then it's not going to be about the units. You're taking the Awake Expander and enough Sacreds to expand. You're going to kill someone with the combination of your monster and your units, and then you're going to transition pretty straight away into your summonable commanders and thugs and that sort of thing. You're not going to dwell on the sacred units. If you're taking the Awake Titan, you're probably using a bless that works for the Titan, which is going to be even better for the thugs and whatnot. You're not doubling down on the units. If you're going imprisoned unit focused, then you're going to want to scale the amount of sacreds you have until people start bringing out specialized counters, and then you're going to pivot into late game summons. The final thing I'll say before I move on to god design with this is, just because Lanka has a really strong summon and blood game doesn't mean you should forget all the other things you can do. Because if you do, you're going to become one-dimensional, one-note. You're not going to win the mid-game battles, which is where elemental magic and other sorcery paths are going to be decisive. Remember, you are a nation with air death cross paths. You are a nation with nature magic. So you've got all this good stuff, and you've got it in Sabbathable quantities on units that are really tough and can survive doing Sabbaths. Even your slaves have 21 hit points. So Lanka can do some really good communion magic in the early and mid game. Blood is its economic solution, but as so far as delivering battlefield results in the mid game, you can throw all sorts of amazing magic into the play. You can do air elementals, you can do army-wide buffs, you can do fog warriors, you can do, well, you wouldn't want to do mass protection unless you've got serious fire resistance and you're blessed, but the options there. You can do mass flight, you can do life after death, you can do wailing winds and put a timer on your opponent, you can do storm thunderstrike. All of these are things you can do. You can't do them as well as nations that are dedicated to them, but all of them are options that are available to you. You can shadow blast with the best of them if you need to. Don't forget that the basis of your combat magical power can be Sabbath-enabled elemental and sorcery magic. It doesn't have to just be all blood all the time. The blood is just there to overwhelm your opponents given time and to up your numbers. So, all that taken away suggests a nation which has a high skill ceiling, lots of decisions to be made about where you focus. Your research is wide open between gear for thugs and alteration for army buffing. There are conjuration options there, there are blood options there. Almost every path, probably not Thalm, has something to offer. Lanka. Like, you can absolutely go howl. You can go howl people if you want. You can You can take poison resistance on your sacreds, and you can go. Well, no, you can't go poison people. You don't have the water cross path. That's one example of something you don't have, but you can do just about anything else. There's a lot of flexibility here. The trick is not to get absolutely drowned with choices. Survive the first 24 turns, win your first war, have it, and then your late game and middle game basically write themselves. Let's go talk about god design a bit, because there are options here, and people always tell me to spend more time on god design, so that's what we'll do. Okay, here's the Lunken god selection. It's not huge, but it's pretty good. You've got some decent options in every category. So far as your awake monsters go, you've got Worm, you've got the Great White Bull, both are good. Earthsnake's a bit expensive nowadays, but, here they are. Of these, the trick is Lanka is probably going to want fire shock resistance, so the good thing is both of your awake monster options have Earth. So something as simple as goes an awful long way towards keeping your units alive. And with scales, you get 1 free dump on temperature, going up to 3 heat. So from 2 preference, that is a no-brainer, because you're protecting yourself from the summer up, and you're going to actually make more during winter when the temperature comes down. This is just a free scale. You're probably doing that to take full advantage of chaos power and your blood hunting bonus and whatnot, which gets you an awful lot of scale points right off the bat. You don't need much production, but you probably want luck, and you probably want magic, and you probably want growth. So you probably want these 3 things in some amount. The reason you want luck is because you've got a lot more events coming in, because you've got this turmoil, right? So if you do that, you can end up with plus 21% in terms of the number of events and 30% luck. It's a good deal. Either way, you can get decent scales and an awake monster operating like that. There are options available to you. I'm not a big fan of these things. Like, Earthsnake is entirely reasonable. He's just expensive, and you're not going to get any other path. So the problem here is you're not getting much bless for your units later on. But awake monster options are there. No Drakon, sadly, just dragons. In terms of Titans, you've got some Indian Titans that are available to you. The Devi of Darkness, the Destroyer of Worlds, and the Nataraja are all available. And of these, the Devi and the Destroyer are both 20-point discounts compared to what they would ordinarily be. So The Destroyer of Worlds doesn't give you the Earth Path, unfortunately, and it's way too expensive to buy. The Devi of Darkness does give you Earth and Blood, meaning something like, not Blood Bond, something like that becomes eminently affordable. It's not very much blessed, though, by the standards of what Lanka might want, but it's the bare minimum in order to operate. This is good enough to keep thugs operating. And if you make that dormant and you do your dump scales, you've got a lot of points available in order to buy up stuff, or even to grab more in terms of your scales. Not just scales, your magic. Like I can almost go 3-3-3 here. So I'd probably go 2-3-3. Hope to get a growth throne and grab one. I can grab one more point up here. There you are. I can go Strong Vitae, or I could swap out Blood Surge, or options, okay? So Dormant Titan, definitely something you can do. Nataraja gets you into the fire path as well and gives you Astral. So here you're dumping Blood Surge, you're taking Fire Shock Resistance, and we're probably taking, at this point, maybe attack skill, or we're going up to 4 here, and we're taking major magic resistance and minor magic resistance, or some combination thereof. Like options here. The key is, in both cases, you're looking at a 4-armed size 6 Indian chassis. The Nataraja has built-in fire shield, which is going to be brutal for things that are not fire resistant early on. And the Devi of Darkness has Fear 10. So if she survives long enough, she can make people just run away. Also, nice weapons built in. Still probably going to want to add shields and things like that. So no fire shield, but instead we have Fear, which is kind of cool. And then you got rainbow chassis, a whole bunch of rainbow chassis. The absolute cheapest is the Maharishi, but you've also got all sorts of little ones down here that you can buy. Let's just pick one to show them off here. So here what you would do is you would imprison. You go to 5 or 6 Dominion. And now this is more if we want to get in the business of minor fire resistance. So that just negates our negative. It doesn't fully cancel it. And it's still a little problematic for the 10 fire, whatever, but you get your +2 attack skill. You probably want Blood Surge, because that's as good as another couple of attack points for most of your sacreds. And you can just keep going, because your scales are almost perfect already at this point. Let's add some defense and minor cold resist. Heck, will make them shock resistant too. Like mega shock resist. So now we've got so much shock resist that we're now a Wrathful Skies nation. So this is now this is 15 shock resist. So Sabbath, Wrathful Skies, game on. Like, go for it. You can pick one more 4 here, or you can almost go 3-3-3. You could play around with it. Things to grab from the various categories. Magic resistance would be nice to grab from Astral. From nature, what you might want is poison resist, but your units are so tough and burly that you can probably tank through it a lot of the time. And you've got nature magic for Serpent's Blessing if you really need it. Like you can see, we've started to get some pretty respectable layering on our units. Our sacreds are now going to picking up. So under this scenario, Apalankasha defending its homeland is going to be taken up to attack skill 16 by its chaos. It's going to be taken up to attack skill 18 by its bless, and then above attack skill 20 by Blood Surge if it gets its Blood Surge off. And it's before experience stars or anything like that. That's pretty respectable. That's going to reliably hit a lot of high defense enemy units, and it's going to hit them really bloody hard. It's going to hit them for 30 plus damage, and it's going to kill them. So they may not trade super cost efficiently with Mega Bless Vanheers or whatever, but they're at that point your sacreds are at least respectable. So most people don't talk about this, or at least I haven't seen this sort of stuff mentioned in the guide, but I've done a little bit of testing, and while it's certainly not as optimal as playing out Vanheers, very few things are, there's a lot of things it does counter. So there you are. That's some guide options for Lanka. How would I rate the nation overall? It's above average. It's above average. Pretty good nation. Any blood nation has a late game plan built in, but unlike, for example, say, who's a good example? Middle-aged Bulba. Middle-aged Bulba is a good example of the problem of being a really good blood nation that's also kind of squishy and shit in the early game. Like, they're not terrible, but they're pretty bad. They're vulnerable. Lanka can at least defend itself. Lanka built appropriately can actually get really aggressive. It can scale its blood economy. It has a lot of sacreds, good summons. It can convert its blood magic into usable things. Plus, it's got a pretty good battle magic core in the sense that it's got some quite powerful mages who can Sabbath up if necessary in order to deploy some pretty heavy death, air, nature magic. And that's solid. There are some diversity gaps which you can solve if you go Conjuration or whatnot, but if you don't solve the diversity gaps immediately, it's not that problematic because you can do an awful lot with what you've got. So that's Lanka. I hope people have enjoyed the look at a second Monkey Nation. I appreciate my patrons as always. It has been a difficult few months as we deal with the COVID outbreak down here. My work at the moment is COVID economic recovery. I've been repointed for my regular work for some months now. So it's pretty full on. So I don't have as much time for videos as I normally do, but it's always very important to me that the Patreon videos get made. And Lanka was a genuinely fun and entertaining nation to cover. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all next time.